Hey, folks. My name is Ted. Thanks for joining the Business of Cyber show today. We're starting a little bit late. Small mistakes sometimes lead to big impacts. And what we did today was scheduled for 12 Central. So if you're online and you're waiting for us, that's 100% my mistake. But I tell you what, I'm eager to get started. We've got a really great lineup today. I'm joined by a really great guest to the show, and what we're going to be talking about today is actually top soft skills in cyber. If you recall, the whole premise of the business of cyber is there's not enough people, there's not enough budget, and there's not enough time to really get through our overall cyber roadmaps. And that's for the entire critical infrastructure space. One of the commitments that I made was to always talk about people, budgets, or time, ways you can save them, ways you can be better at it. And really excited to be already on episode 24 and diving right in. I'm joined by somebody that I've been wanting to do this with for a while, Mr. Sean Tufts out of Colorado. Great to have you. How are you, sir? Thanks for being on the show.
I'm great, Ted. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. I wish, though, I'm uncomfortable. I usually have a big studio. I got a good mic, and I'm on location today, so we're making do.
That's because you're helping asset owners all over the world, man. You called earlier last week, said, "Look, I'm traveling. I really want to talk about top soft skills in cyber." We've been trying to contemplate doing something like this for a while. And I encouraged him to do it. And so thanks for taking time out of your day. I know that you're meeting with clients and asset owners. But I think the world needs to hear a little bit about your story, a little bit about kind of what you've done in the past. And, soft skills in cybersecurity are not something people think of a lot. Everybody wants to talk about the most awesome technology. Everybody wants to talk about the coolest new thing. Where we came together, folks, was on this idea that it's not always the technical advantage that wins the crown. So, to help us kind of get started, what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about overall the cyber skills statistics, and then we'll jump right into soft skills. But before we do, Sean, would you please tell the world a little bit about yourself, where you're from, just to give them some context before we get started?
Yeah, so I'm currently the managing partner at Optiv. I'm focused on critical infrastructure. My whole background comes from that arena. You can see on the list here, developed, let's see, I'll go way back. So there's about 6 of us that have NFL roots. So I was a linebacker for the Carolina Panthers, went to the University of Colorado, and then got drafted out there in the 6th round. Man, I tell you what, someone asked me the other day, like, how'd you go from the NFL to IT? And I was like, I have no idea. But it was a lot of the soft skill stuff we're talking through. I ended up finding a job, built a couple wind farms. I sweet talked my way into General Electric, and at the time we were doing some really fun stuff. On the soft skill side, I got a cold email. I was selling a dead technology. We were selling electric motors and things like that. And I got a cold email that said, who knows our clients that wants to talk cyber and sell cyber and work in cyber? And I was like, that sounds like way more fun. So right. I fly up to Vancouver with these cats, and I sit down, and it's a practical exam. They're asking me about what ports on a firewall should be open and closed. 5 minutes in, that's all I lasted. And I was like, hey, this isn't going well, is it? And they were like, no, you're super failing. I was like, yeah, okay. So we pivoted the whole conversation, and we changed it to, hey, why are you asking these questions? What does an operator need to know? When I'm working on an LNG rig, why are we talking about this kind of firewall versus that kind of firewall? What are we talking from the segmentation? And then they were like, hey, you totally are not getting this job, but we have something else for you. Like, we want to talk about how you can help us with our services. And that went really well. So it turned that into a job at Optiv. Last 5 years, I've been running our critical infrastructure OT security branch. Why Ted and I know each other. Took it from nothing to a $35 million practice, which has been really fun.
Very cool. Very cool. It's a growing segment, and I think that it'll be really interesting to see hear some of your stories about how folks that maybe don't come from a technical background can actually make a big impact. Take a look at this slide, folks. I'm going to go full screen just for a second to make it larger. Took a look at Statista this morning, most sought attributes in cyber professionals globally between 22 and 23. What are the changes, right? The top one is curiosity and an eagerness to learn. The second is strong commo skills. Then we get to, a knowledge of cyber. Then we get to certs. Then we get to advanced cyber concepts. And then pretty much everything below that is non-technical in nature. And what I thought was, I mean, that bodes exactly to what you were saying, Sean, which is what are there when you're really trying to deliver a cybersecurity end-to-end solution, you're not just dealing with tech, you're dealing with people that either have to know what the business impact is, they have to know what the operational impact is. But a lot of times it sounds like you implemented number one, that eagerness to learn, that curiosity, and that's paid off for you.
Yeah, when we interview candidates coming in, that's the thing we want to know. No one's going to have the right tech stack. And, everyone sees on Twitter and all the ridiculous job applications that come through with,
Right.
40 years experience on a 5-year-old technology, those kind of dumb things. There are no unicorns. I don't believe that at all. But I think we have a lot of good practitioners out there who are best at the talking component and adequately explaining, number one, concept, very technical concepts, but number two, how to bridge the gap, because there is no natural bridge and there's no one coming to save you, and you either have to build it, learn it, or develop it. Right, and that's mostly what we're looking for in employees.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Check this slide out. I thought this was pretty cool as well. So 4 million in the cyber workforce gap, 520 in North America. This is not a surprise. But what you just said makes a lot of sense, which is nobody's going to come save you. So all of the asset owners that I work with on a regular basis, if I ask them to just answer yes or no, do you need more people? It's always yes, right? So the question is, where are we going to get them? And I think that dovetails into, well, if we can't build, what's easier to train and what's more readily available? Do we have more soft skills in the market and we can train somebody technical, or is it easier to train soft skills to somebody that's utterly technical? I know what my answer is. I don't know what yours is, Sean, but I think that's what we should be asking the world, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's no unicorns, right? Everyone's looking for that one specific narrow skill set, and it's just not available. And we have, roughly 5 stadium fulls of people to go fill and to teach those things, and learning off of one thing. That's what I encourage a lot of folks. Like, once you get a small expertise, what are you looking to do to round that out and expand that expertise up and grow your skill set wide? And that's what we look for in a lot of practitioners.
Yeah. I threw a couple of these up, like adaptability, critical thinking, communication, creativity. I mean, I don't think, when we were thinking, folks, about what we wanted to talk about, we really didn't want to pinpoint on one top 5 list of soft skills. I think what we came to the conclusion of is that there's a lot of soft skills, and what you just said, Sean, I want to double down on. So you're saying if you're really good at this one thing or these 2 things, then focus on that and maybe round out your team with other people with other skills, sort of like kind of intermix them. And that's the best way to kind of approach things, rather than trying to teach everybody a specific role. Dive into that a little bit. I'm curious.
You know what? I focus a lot on finding the not me. I need people around me that are not in my skill set. I need to find others that can support me in ways that I need to be supported, right? Right. And I think that's true for the whole industry, and finding out well-rounded practitioners. When you think about building a team, you can't have a team of Teds or a team of Seans. You can't replicate yourself when you're hiring. So when we talk through and are looking at candidates, we are most often, diversity is thrown out around in a lot of different ways these days, but looking to find what that person looks like that is the exact opposite. Because we want that richness of experience, that richness of support, that richness of thought, and finding out what that can look like.
Yeah, it makes sense. Somebody once told me, asked me, like, what value do you offer to the organization? And it really makes you think, like, what are the top kind of couple skill sets? And I think that I think there's an element of maturity in being able to say, I'm kind of okay at these things, but I'm really good over here. So I'm either going to not do these, or I'm going to hire and find some teammates that are really great at this stuff, or I'm just going to stay frustrated. And I think that the CISOs and the OT directors that I find most successful know exactly what their core skill set is, and then they try to hire others to fill the others. That's kind of what you're saying, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. When you form out a team, and taking an example from my old background in football, you can't have a team full of linemen. you got to go find that richness and start to share experiences and then learning from each other. And that I can't imagine a single team that is homogeneous, that is just the same person. And we run into them on the client side where they hired a whole bunch of pen testers because that's what you know. It's always going to be inefficient.
Yeah, I like that. I like that concept. And I'm going to ask you further about like, what's it like being on an NFL team, right? And I can offer some of the same perspectives in my background. Diversity is a big thing. I think there was another slide, and I didn't end up putting it in, but I saw this thing where highly technical, white middle-aged males, or actually aging, like not aging, but anybody it's an aging workforce from the 1990s all the way to the 2020s. And how has cyber, from a diversity perspective, changed? And now you see a lot more women in the workforce, but you see a lot more minorities in the workforce, but that's not all. When you uncover where their core skill sets lie, a lot of them bring more project manager experience, data analytics experience. A lot of them have different communication skills. So I think that we're trending in that direction. I think that there's a difference though, like you definitely have to have a rounded out technical skill set. So you have your pen testers over here, maybe you have some project managers over here, maybe you have folks that really know network architecture over here. How do you feel? Do you feel like when you walk into some customers and some asset owners that even on the soft skill side, like none of them are communicators, or there's too many data oriented people versus strategic oriented people? So like, how do you see on the soft skill side? What do you see on average when you walk into some client sites?
You know, the existence of sales versus practitioners is always funny, right? Because I always joke that it's a bunch of extroverts preying on introverts. Is that true? Maybe, maybe not. But it is funny when you start to align and start to see as people are forming up what those natural or unnatural skill sets have become. So when we see it on client sites, the ones that are the most effective, and you mentioned project management. We have a guy on my old team that hardcore Texan, just an old dirty boot guy, right? Dirty boot guy. He was a practitioner. He set up programs, and I'll never forget the time he found a great PM, because it was the first time in his life he had a great PM, and how much easier that made his life, and how that skill set of just being able to communicate clearly, efficiently, and have that follow through made his life easier. And that was a time where I saw somebody that went from a hard skill set that was very isolated in thinking to saying, oh, this person who knows PowerPoint can help me in ways that I've always belittled. And that was so cool to watch that light bulb turn on.
Yeah, I have a similar story. I think the biggest challenge is you get a lot of technical people that, let's say introverts, right? Highly data oriented, highly process oriented, but they lack that one strategist on the team, or that one communicator on the team, or the one relationship builder. And that's not to discredit the capacity of the other team members, but it's not their core skill set. You throw somebody in the mix that I would always love to run this exercise. Throw a bunch of techies together who really understand how to implement, configure, manage, scale, even SOC operations, and then give them one really good storyteller. And I bet you what'll happen is all the value that those folks are looking at all the screens, they're seeing all the data models, they know what the right answer is next, but they can't go get the budget to implement a solution, or they can't get a window of maintenance to actually go and update some hardware, some software. And so it's very interesting to see what'll happen if you build your team out like that. And I like diversity on teams specifically for that, because that same person will ask really maybe mundane or low level questions that force simplicity from the highly technical folks, which in my mind is what the industry needs more of. We need to translate really complex data models into bite-size, why do we need to spend more, or why do we need more resources in this place? And I think that's what's missing across the board for a lot of asset owners. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, that one soft skill, and you mentioned it, asking questions. The one that I immediately went to is listening.
Yeah.
We have a lot of bad listeners in tech. We just have people who are very happy to talk, happy to fill the air, and are very uncomfortable taking a step back and realizing where the other person's position is. And I realized that actually very recently. I took that managing partner role and I kind of let my team run with another leader. You have to give up a lot of control.
Right.
And being able to remove your ego from a conversation and let that horse buck and let that person grow into their skill set and expand, that's been really hard. And I think between great question asking, great listening skills, and the ability to let someone be themselves are places where I see a lot of soft skills lacking in our most technical and most appreciated groups. They're still not pulling that piece together.
Yeah, I agree. I've worked with a lot of different entrepreneurial coaches, just kind of rewiring mindsets about things to get to, let's say, the next level of growth. And one of the coolest things that I've done somewhat recently is whoever's asking the most questions in the right way tends to naturally be looked at as the leader of that room. And if you and I've tried it, and I challenge anybody, no matter what size your team is. I think leaders, especially ones that kind of rose up the ranks, and we got a lot of those white beards in our ranks right now that are ready, whether they know it or not, they need to transition out. You know, it's interesting what you say. I hadn't thought about listening and question asking as a soft skill, but you're right, because if you could have a meeting with your direct reports and the only thing that comes out of your mouth as the leader are questions, think about what kind of environment you're creating, right? You're empowering those folks to make statements which are rooted in their core belief systems. You're not opinionated. You're just asking questions. I've done that before, and it makes a really big difference in team dynamic because it makes them responsible for what they are going to talk about, you know? And after you do it 2 or 3 times, folks start to take the responsibility and they start bringing the answers before you ask them.
And there's so many people that are afraid to be wrong in tech, which is really hard. There are no bulletproof one way to do things. And all too often, the people that are not asking questions or just kind of preaching are scared to show that any weakness, any technical fault, any unclear roadmap. But yeah, once you start asking more questions and giving someone the freedom to fill that space and to carve out their own path, that's when you see a technician really grow in their skill set, because then they realize there's more than one person to help them. And there's
and I think a lot of questions are coming to the cyber leaders right now. I think digitization officers, I think CFOs, I think legal right now with what's coming down from the SEC and all the different frameworks and standards globally that people are having to meet. I think what's happening right now is CISOs and OT directors and IT directors are getting a lot of questions asked of them. And so they sort of know the answer. And I think the initial knee-jerk reaction is that they just go to their team and they start saying, we need all this stuff. I think that the top soft skill, in my opinion, as from a cyber leader perspective, is having patience and a strategic mindset. Because the top, let's call it the top, like all those different non-technical roles that are all asking you, are we secure? Are we safe? Are we cyber? How do we compare to our competitors? Like, I'm sure there's some folks on the line listening and they're laughing because that's their world. I think
patience. You just said patience.
Do
we have patience in tech? I didn't think that was allowed. I thought that was
the only. I'm patient to a fault sometimes, and what patience offers in my book is you get to see the situation develop, right? So a lot of people want to implement a certain solution, a tech solution. They want to hire a consultant, or they want to, start configuring, or they want to send somebody to training. And they want real rapidly for results to happen. And let's be honest, in cybersecurity, there's not really a good ROI metric. Did our facility shut down and our facility still operating the right way? Are my people healthy? And no one gives them a reward for that. So I think there's this strive for immediate gratification within the cyber realm. But if you really think about the top skill I look for in somebody I work with, it's actually patience, because they are able to, a sister cousin of is it a sister cousin? A close cousin of patience is strategic. You've got to think about, how does this one thing I'm going to do, this one person I'm going to hire, this one configuration I'm going to do, this one meeting I'm going to have, this one assessment, how does it all tie into a much bigger picture? And I think that's the biggest problem that cyber leaders are dealing with, is that they aren't implementing enough patience and vision and strategy. They're just buying up solutions like crazy. And I don't know what your thoughts are, Sean, but I mean, I think that's where in other industries, I mean, I've seen that work really well.
You know,
To me, that's a big one.
for the people that come from operations backgrounds, that's one of the hardest pieces. And I can think back to when I was, my first desk job, right? And I could never understand why my project wasn't chosen. We had a good ROI. It was a good story. We wanted to build this wind farm here. It would be, this much profit, all that kind of stuff. And I remember feeling there was a personal attack on my work when that one wasn't chosen or selected, or we didn't win the RFP, or, budgets got moved other places. I remember feeling like that was my cross to bear, and it was my little thing. And now that I can get kind of up and I've been running businesses for a little bit, you start to realize that the projects aren't yours. It's not my project. I don't get to own it. It's the companies in which we're operating, and trying to disjoint yourself from that and realizing that, hey, there's other things that the business is doing today that are of equal or sometimes more value. And it's not a personal attack. That's one of the hardest things that I've been focusing on is, not radical candor in that way, because I don't think that ethos is very accurate. But when I'm approaching something that's a trying time for an employee or an operator or a client, and opening it up and saying, hey, here's one good, one bad. Here's one thing that I see that's going really, really well. And here's one thing I see that's really challenging. And I want to challenge you to see what this looks like, and to see if we're on if there can be an improvement made, because this is what I'm witnessing. When you start to format things in ways people can accept it, it's way better than Ted, you stink, pack your bag and get out, right?
Right. Yeah, I tend to agree. It's it forces a continual learning charge on everybody, and that goes for the leader too. Like, what can I be better at? While you were talking, I was thinking about that slide that we had up earlier, and it said that curiosity or a willingness to learn is one of the top skills they look for. Let me throw this at you. Would you not agree that highly technical or super tech savvy folks are some of the most curious people out there? Like, they like to pick locks, they like to break things, they like to fix things, they like to figure out how it works. I mean, the fundamentals of hacking is to see, can I figure out a way in, right? One perspective that I have is, we may not be lacking in our curiosity bucket across cyber. What might be lacking is a willingness of a leader to let the team be curious, challenge them to be curious, so that they can create new innovative ways to solve the same problem, maybe with fewer resources.
I mean, any technician got into this to not live in a box. We got into this because we liked computers. We started, hacking our 8-bit Nintendo, right? We started reformatting the ham radio. Like, all of us got into the space to expand conversations. Right. But in the reality of cybersecurity, you start to close conversations. You say, this is the firewall environment. It lives here. Don't touch it. There's one way to do it, and we can't be creative. And then you put people in roles where they're the Palo person, and they sit on the firewall, and they do the ports, and they do this and that. And then you start up a new team that is the endpoint team. And we keep cascading and narrowing people's fields of choice. So we have a saying on our team, it says, let her buck. Like, someone's got a good idea, you got to let that horse buck. They want to go solve and harness those challenges. And as we go through our technicians' careers, the moment we start closing doors, we start closing people off. And then employee satisfaction drops.
Right.
Yeah, so I hate when I walk into an environment and someone's like, that's the firewall team. I'm like, okay, well, could we define that better, please? Because I know they're not just working with firewalls. So I think some of those naming choices, some of those career pathing, are ways our management teams can help us make people feel like they have ownership over something, can be more creative in the way that we wanted to be when we started in tech.
So you had a presentation that you sent to me. I think it was like, what are the ways that NFL team building are matched in cyber, something like that. And I thought it was really cool, but there was this one slide that you had. I think you were on defense, and you had this thing like what makes a great NFL player, and it was about data pattern recognition, something like that, because you were looking at a wide receiver. I don't know, it was like 9.5 yards.
Yep.
Talk to me for a second about how an NFL player is creative or has the ability to be creative. Because I'm not a football player. Other sports, yes. My thought is you run a play, you're supposed to, have that guy. Like, it's pretty set, right? I think what you're going to tell me, I'm hoping, is there is an element of curiosity, or how, or not. How does that match what we're talking about, Sean?
So when I ask this question in public, like what makes a great NFL player? The first things that come to mind are the obvious things, right?
Strong, fast, big, right?
Strong, fast, big, angry, hard-headed. None of those are the right metric. None of them. Yeah, you have to have won the genetic lottery. I'm 6'5" and I'm really fast. I didn't do anything to get in the way of that, right? I used that. But the best players are actually the best data analytics engines. Think about that.
Data analytics engines. And we're talking offense, defense, anywhere. Somebody who's able to look at the field, recognize what they're seeing, which their data is in the players and their formation.
Yep.
And then what?
So at any given time, do you know when you're watching like the making of the Lord of the Rings and they show the pictures of the guys with the balls on them, right?
Yeah.
Those are all data points. Every single person on defense, and I was a linebacker. My job was pattern recognition. If I could put the pieces in play, I could run faster. What that means, I was supposed to pay attention to the 2 feet of the tailback, the 2 tips of the guard's shoulders, and the outside foot of the furthest receiver from me. I had to dump every other data point on that NFL field. From the quarterback, I never paid attention to him at all. Don't look at the quarterback once. He will always lie to you. Ignore the cheerleaders, ignoring weather conditions. All those things had to get dumped from the filter. And then you can start to parse things together. I was good enough that I knew when the tailback's feet picked up, when he put it down, I was correlating the other data points and running because I knew what the pattern was. I knew where I had to go. I played with a guy, Jesse Armstead. Jesse was a first-round pick out of Miami. He wore number 1 as a linebacker in Miami. For some of you, that means a lot. You don't wear number 1 as a linebacker unless you're a dog. And he was. He was in his 9th and 10th year, but he couldn't run. I was a rookie. I was made of metal. I could do anything. He came from Dallas Carter High School. They were famous for being the villain in Friday Night Lights, the movie. He was on that team. He was the guy kicking people's face masks off. Like, that was him. They made a movie about him. At that point in his career, he was broke. He couldn't run. Like, actually couldn't run. So we'd be sitting there in his 12 years of experience and my brand new. I told you I was good enough when I could pick it up and put it down. He was good enough that he was seeing it when the tailback was flexing and deciding to fire his muscles. So he was yelling at me running, calling the play out well before I could ever even envision it. And I was running a 4.5 40 at that time. He was beating me to the ball every single time because his pattern recognition was faster.
Wow. It's interesting. So if you're going to be in cyber, you have to be somewhat technically savvy. I mean, you can't not enjoy this stuff. You've got to be, I think you got to be a great project manager in general in cyber because you that's what we are constantly doing. I think data-oriented folks are going to fly, right? But how effectively you can recognize patterns, that's super interesting. I'll tell you, as an entrepreneur, a lot of the things that you were saying, I could intertwine. My job is to see what's happening in a market and forget 99% of it, but then look at these 5 little data indicators, which, by the way, they change all the time, and then make decisions about where you're going to build your team, where you're going to kind of focus your efforts from a market perspective. All it is pattern recognition, and I call it seeing patterns throughout all those data points. Super interesting. Well, I appreciate you sharing. Dovetailing to a little bit from my history and where I think you were talking recently about people that have done a certain thing a certain way a long time. I think that's one of the reasons OT and IT have a lot of challenges working together. It's not because they don't want to, it's just they've done their job a long time a certain way. IT wants to patch everything at all costs. OT wants to not touch it at all costs and just make sure it keeps running. So one of the reasons when I got out of the military, out of the Army, one of the reasons I got out is because everything was scripted. Everything was 100% already scripted. My next 20 years, I'm not talking about battlefield operations, but even then, this is exactly how the entire team is supposed to organize. This is the job responsibilities. This is the roles. This is how we're supposed to do every single thing. And it was all scripted, right? I enjoy working in environments where a lot looser. And I think that too few cyber professionals implement that same element of change or the ability to change in their work, right? So you're in a formation in football, you see what the tailback is doing, you see what the line is doing, and that guy's yelling at you because he says, hey, change the play. I know what's going to happen next. For me as an entrepreneur, I rely on my soft skills to be able to see data and pattern recognition. How many times could a CISO implement better pattern recognition, better communication down their team, and better curiosity of a different way to do things when the entire pattern model changes? The CFO wasn't really part of the decision-making process, 18, 24 months ago. Legal kind of stayed in their own lane. Now you have folks that are having to deal with a lot more pressures all over the place, and I think they get overwhelmed. And so, yeah, it's a good point. What do you think about resiliency, Sean? I just said the word overwhelmed. I think anybody would agree. Where do you see like resiliency, grit? I don't know what word matches that to soft skill. How do you see that playing into the cyber field right now, or at least for the next decade?
Resiliency is a tricky word. And we have, I would say that the biggest part of resiliency that I see is removing the self from the equation. We all have skill sets. We all have things we like to do. We all have things we don't like to do. We're all going to have that one engagement we don't want to do, or that one site we have to go to that we know is going to be a problem. We're going to have conflict there. That natural conflict is always really healthy, but removing the you from it and being able to take a step back and say, hey, this is the mission. And unfortunately, we're all cogs in some machine, right? And I have to perform so that everyone else can. The genius of the Patriots in the Bill Belichick way, the Patriot way. Do you know what all that boiled down to?
I don't want to say Tom Brady.
You want to though.
It's what I was gonna say, but I know that's not where you're probably going. So please educate me.
He had one mantra: do your job.
Oh, that is true.
He said, do your job. I don't care where you come from. I don't care who you are, what you were doing. You were brought in here to do this piece, and that is your goal.
So would you say that's decentralization? Hey, go do your job. I'm not going to tell you how to do it better, right? Isn't that freedom? I mean, when you think about the soft skills of that, it's trust.
It's trust, and it makes a very resilient, or it cracks people. It does. It makes them tougher and able to perform, or it clamps them down and shoots them out. So when we're talking about resiliency, the people that were under that Patriot way, they became resilient because they had to. They were forced into a box, and the performance increased because the personality was stripped out. We don't care who you are. They cared about Tom Brady, but anyone else, they flushed people out of their contracts early. They pushed people around. They were the first to identify that pattern recognition of this guy's getting old and he's a little expensive. Let's get him out of here. So that was the Patriot way, was instilling a resilience in process and pattern that removed the persona from it.
I think, not being a fan of one team or another, and surely not being a fan of, I am kind of a fan.
It's okay.
Say that idea that you move people off of teams. I'll tell you this right now. On my team, I say something all the time. It says, look, the company is going to grow when individuals grow, and the company will flatline if we as a group of individuals are not growing. So my focus for my team is, I want to know what your challenges are. Like, I want to know what you can't figure out. I want to know what's bothering you and how can you make it better. And because if you're not constantly pushing yourself to the next level, this ain't the place for you. And so during an interview, I asked, like, hey, what do you really want? And if I don't get a sense of, I want to do more, I want to add more value. Teams, I think, especially on the OT side, don't do that enough. Now, we're dealing with a foundation of 3 million cyber roles. And I'm not saying you should start firing people left and right and hiring people just because they have immense soft skills. What I am saying, to your point, is if you adopted the Patriots methodology to your cyber team, what could possibly be true? It may take 5 years, but don't you want a decentralized approach where your staff meetings are just question asking? And there's enough trust from that SOC analyst or that automation expert that you just walk the CEO to the shop floor and you're like, well, just ask him. Like think about that. I think that's where we should strive. And I think a lot of OT and IT leaders right now are like, no, I can't touch any of my people. I can't really push them too hard because they're already overloaded. I don't see that on a day-to-day basis, but I challenge the security leaders to think about it, because I think it's important.
The best thing that ever happened to me was, and we were talking last night with some friends about what motivates you. So I had early in my life, someone figured out the thing that motivates me is the phrase, I bet you can't. That would give me. Oh, and
talk to the co-founder. You got to have an enemy at all times to pop, right? I love it.
But my wife harnesses it though, and she's like, what? I bet you can't do the dishes tonight. And I'm like, come on, I know what you're doing. Don't do that. But that soft skill EQ piece, that strength finders, that finding out what makes someone tick, that and alone on spending time with your employees and figuring out what does Ted respond to? What does Sean respond to? Is he a person or she a person that can take more stress? Do they need that in their career? Are they best if they move off this team? The best thing that ever happened to me was getting laid off at GE. That was an amazing experience. I needed to be laid off from GE. I was able to then go and grow and find new skill sets and having to carve my path rather than just one given to me, which it sounds like you had for your military days.
Probably, man, I was a round peg in a round hole in the military, and I got out for some different reasons. 15 years later, I realized I was never going to, it was too structured for me, right? And then I moved to Shell, and I would not be in this position right here solving, with what I do, what I think is a really big issue, because I experienced it at Shell, right? I wouldn't be able to build the team I have here if I hadn't had some tough experiences as a business owner after Shell before what I do now. So I'm with you, man. I think that one soft skill that I think anybody can use is, it goes a little bit back to patience, but I think a little bit has to be visionary. I mean, you have to envision a different state of security with a different type of team dynamic, a different budget allocation process, a different management of your vendors in order for you to get there. And I think that's what you're saying is if you'd have stayed at GE doing that job that maybe you weren't utterly happy with, you wouldn't be right here. And I think a lot of CISOs would agree like that. That's a good point, man. It's a good point. You mentioned, as we're talking about soft skills, I have one that I want to mention, but you mentioned strength finders. I've used it in the past. Would you like the audience to know about any kind of tools that you use on a regular basis to evaluate your team that then you use in turn? I'll let you go first, and then I have one.
From a tool perspective, I use a lot of that one up, one down. Hey, this went well. This was a challenge. I use that a lot where we're talking about that way you're always giving constructive criticism, even to your all-stars. Right. And you're always giving praise, even to someone who really isn't performing well. You're finding a way for them to feel good about something and also feel challenged. So I use that a lot from an interpersonal standpoint. Right. My kids are tired of hearing it too.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. How old are your kids?
9 and 7.
Yeah. Mine are 9 and 11. I'm actually going to do that when I pick them up from school. Give me something good. Give me something not great. No, it's great. One thing that I started doing recently was at the beginning of a management meeting or senior staff meeting, we all had, stuff that we brought. We would just sit there for 7 or 8 minutes. I did not think of this. Somebody told me that Amazon does it for an hour, which is ridiculous overkill. But what it forces everybody to do is, everybody's quiet. They look at everybody else's slides. In turn, no one presents. We just ask questions of each other. And that drives the critical kind of communication. Number 2, it forces everybody to really be thoughtful about what they put on that slide, knowing full well everybody's going to read everything on it. I've mentioned it before. You talked earlier about risk and how somebody could maybe take on risk or take on more projects, or maybe somebody doesn't like to take on those projects. And I think a recognition of the personalities that are natural of your team is one of the best soft skills that I would recommend in cyber, because in order to be successful, I think you have to have a very robust kind of array of skill sets, especially today more than any time. One thing that I've used is called the Kolbe A Index, Kolbe. It's one of those questions that you have to answer 50 questions as fast as you can. And what it does is it's trying to figure out when you're most natural. If you're really stressed out or you're really happy, you approach your work a certain way. And what it does is it gives you, how do you handle data? How do you handle processes? How do you handle risk? And how do you handle tooling? And it has been one of the coolest things that I've implemented for my team. And I've recommended that to others to use, because it'll help you understand that person on your team really likes new innovative ideas and will get motivated if they're given new projects every day. This person over here actually gets really nervous and doesn't like to be on 100 projects. They like to dive into 2 until it's complete, and they'll get freaked out if it's not complete. Which one of these am I going to have testing out new vendors? Which one am I going to have managing vendors that I'm going to keep for 3 years, right? Like, I've challenged the industry to think about it differently. Okay, so this is my network guy. This is my my vulnerability guy. This is my incident response guy. And so you run project stem to stern based on skill set or control type, or does everybody share in the evaluation, testing, negotiation, implementation, management, refinement, ROI of all the control types and the solutions? I don't know the right answer. I know that we should be challenging ourselves on. So that's just a tool that I use, and I encourage you to use it too. Take a look at it, Sean.
Yeah, I absolutely will. I'd love to see a link on that.
Yeah. Well, somebody sent a note. They 100% agree with Tufts when someone tells me that I can't hold my beer.
True. Yeah, the redneck version of "I bet you can't" is definitely echoed by "hold my beer."
Hey,
that is a 1-2.
The same thing. I tell her all the time. I'm like, hey, somebody called. I don't know who they were. They called and they said that they had seen you online, and that's this, that you could have done it a little better. Just blows it up. Well, listen, we're at time. I could sit here and talk all day long. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, Sean. I appreciate the stories. You have an immensely unique background, and I really appreciate all the stories. Send the audience out with maybe some challenges about how soft skills can maybe improve their happiness with their work and maybe the success of their cyber team. I'll give you the last word.
I'm big on finding a friend. It sounds like a dumb sentence, right? But when we're practitioners and we're head in the sand doing work, finding someone that you can really collaborate with and someone that you can bounce ideas off of, not in your direct work stream, not in your direct team, but someone outside. Because I think all too often in companies, when people start getting upset and frustrated, there's someone on the other side of the fence that's been there and done that and can calm you down and to give you good vision on on a different angle, right? And I know I put a lot of one-on-ones on people's calendars and say, hey man, I just want to talk. We don't have an agenda. We're all remote. So it'd be good to see your face and hear your voice and not have something scripted or a PowerPoint. And yeah, finding that friend in your company and identifying who you can trust. And I think that's really important.
Well, and also trains a couple soft skills: learner, mentor. We didn't talk about mentorship. I mean, think about how powerful your statement is powerful, but think about how powerful if every CISO or OT director out there had a really good trainer or mentor on his or her team. How impactful could that be? Pretty awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time out of your busy day. I know your clients need you back, so thanks for making the time. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching the Business of Cyber show. Mr. Sean Tufts, from NFL to oil and gas to solutions delivery. He's been through it all, and I appreciate kind of the overview of how we can connect soft skills across the spectrum. Join us live next week. This time, I promise, we'll be starting right at 10 a.m. That's on me. We're going to be talking about a topic that a lot of people should be joining, and it's called OT cyber terminology. I'm going to be joined with Daniel Enric. We're going to be talking about OT versus IT. We're going to be talking about segmentation. Syntax is very important, and we'll continue our ride in the Business of Cyber series. Sean, have a wonderful day. Thanks for being a part of it, and talk soon.
Yeah, thank you, Ted.